Welcome everybody to a Commander deck tech on Blim Comedic Genius. This is going to be very casual, just going to kind of sit back, go through the 99 and talk about the deck and talk about the theory and talk about Blim. And you can leave your comments down below at any point. Leave timestamps if you're talking about a certain card or whatever you want. And I do have a stack of cards that were like considerations, cards that have been in and out of the deck. And of course it in its current form as it is today. So, of course, subject to change, and in that change, it might be between these or new cards that come out. But all right, so first of all, let's start right with Blim. Now, reading him, what is he? He's a 4 CMC, 4/3 flying. So it's so decent, you know, a guy in the air for 4 mana is not bad in your command zone, so you're guaranteed to get a little flyer every turn. And now let's read his special ability and what kind of makes the deck special. Whenever Blim deals combat damage to a player, that player gains control of target permanent you control. Then each player loses life and discards cards equal to the number of permanents they control but don't own. Alright, so that's pretty straightforward, but it's a lot of words. So let's kind of recap a little quick theory and theorize what cards we might want to give away and how we might want to use this ability. So in general, if you're attacking with Blim, you've got something you're ready to give away. And now, if you do not have anything to give away or any plan for this trigger, you simply don't want to attack because you're going to end up giving away a land or giving away Blim himself or giving away one of your mana rocks or giving away one of your creatures. Basically something that your opponent can actually use. You don't necessarily want to give them anything they can actually use unless it's incredibly weak, like maybe a 0/1 or a completely useless thing, because you want to at least get that discard trigger, make them lose a little bit of life, potentially stack up some dummy permanents that are no good. So this can backfire a little bit. Sometimes your opponents will be like, oh, I need something to sack. Perfect, you gave me this thing that I don't need, I'll just sack it. It has the potential to backfire, and it also has another potential to backfire where if you control permanents you don't own, so you've stolen your opponent's stuff or reanimated stuff from their graveyard, or they've gifted you stuff in one of their ways, then you can end up discarding cards and losing life from Blim's triggers. So you have to be very methodical about when you want to trigger this, when you want to attack, when you want to try to get them to sneak through and get this to go off. And we'll see that a lot, and I'm going to talk about that a lot. Now, it is important to note that this does target a permanent, so it does go on the stack, and once you target something, you can do stuff with that target on the stack. A little more of an advanced rule, but it's extremely important to know if you play Magic, because if you don't understand this whole thing go on the stack and people being able to respond and you be able to hold priority and put more stuff on the stack, this deck probably is going to not be able to be used to its full potential. So it is a great deck to help learn the stack and understand the stack a little better, just try to use him properly. So I really like this deck. It's been very interesting to play creatively and to build creatively. And now before we go any further, I want to say a few things about the commander group I usually play in, because that does influence how I build my deck. We tend to not try to play top level competitive. We often go for mid-range decks. We avoid, they're not illegal and people are welcome to use them if they got them, but we tend to, in general, kind of avoid the overpriced 0-drop mana effects like Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt. We'll occasionally run a Mox or two, but generally we steer away from those particular mana rocks, and there's a few others. We just don't overdo it on the Moxes. So that's the thing to note. If you want to make this competitive, there's definitely stuff like that you could add to help get your combos off faster. You could add more tutors. There's not an overabundance of tutors in here either. So alright, well, let's just dig into it. Let's dig into the cards. I'm just going to go one by one, talk about each one. Some of them have a specific point to Blim, and others are just because I like the card. So I'm going to try to differentiate when I say that. And if a new thing or a new theory comes up while I'm talking about that card that interacts with Blim in a specific way, or this deck in a specific way, I will say that. Okay, so without further ado, let's go ahead and start digging in. I'm just going to go one by one. So first, right off the rip here, we see a Murderous Rider. Murderous Rider does not act in any particular special way with Blim Comedic Genius. It's just strong removal and a lifelink guy. I like the card. This could definitely be replaced with something else in the deck. It is simply in here as a hard removal slot for Creature Planeswalker. Pyroblast, obviously it's strong against anything with blue, and there's a lot of blue and a lot of counters and a lot of mess up your plan from the blue side. So running Pyroblast or Red Elemental Blast, or even both, is often a no-brainer in any deck that has red, because we don't want our combos interrupted once we're kind of going off. We don't want our stuff countered when it's critical. Pretty obvious. This is actually in here in a removal spot. Nothing specific to Blim again. Dampening Sphere. This is actually in here for Blim. This is one of those cards that you can give away, and it doesn't matter. Because no matter who has this, who owns it, or who controls it rather, its ability is exactly the same. So you play this, it kind of slows people down. Blim tends to be a little slow and often play only 1 or 2 spells per turn. So it's perfectly fine for you to have this ability. It might really mess up other people, and it's a perfect thing to give away something with that Blim combat trigger. Because like I said, it does not matter who owns this, they're just going to get penalized for owning it by having to discard cards from its trigger and lose life. So that's why this is in here, and it's a Blim card. Spike Field Hazard, really in here just as a card I was trying out, nothing specific to Blim here. The exile can be very relevant, but 90% of the time this gets played as a land on first or second turn. While you don't have anything else to play, don't mind it coming into play tap. But sometimes this, this removed from the game effect and that 1 damage can make a big difference, so I just like the card. Heartless Act, another card I just like. Kills a creature with no counters. We do have Goldspan. Goldspan has several uses in here. Obviously, he's just a strong card, creating those treasures and setting you up for later turns or for your second main phase. The treasures. Treasures are nice in this deck. Treasures are something you can target with Blim, and while that target's on the stack, you can sack them so that your opponent ends up with nothing. Sometimes you want that to happen. If you just need the damage from your commander, and you don't have anything to give away, having a treasure can be really nice. And we'll see that multiple times. There is some themes of things you can sacrifice before they go away. So Goldspan is pretty strong. He synergizes decently with Blim. And we do have a few cards in here that want really large amounts of mana, so these treasures can also be handy for that. So multiple reasons. I think it's just a strong card. It's kind of a pricey card. If you're on a budget, you might not be able to get him, but there are plenty of other options, as we'll see, especially once I get to the stack of stuff that didn't quite make it. So if you don't have any of these big cards, unless I say it's like super critical, best card in the deck, you don't necessarily need it. There are other cards that can, in theory, do similar things. Goldspan's just very strong. If you got him, I think he's a good fit here. Swamp, you know what Swamp's for. So speaking of lands, I'm pretty sure that there are 37 lands in the deck, and I do count these as a land, I believe. So you should get a pretty solid amount of lands every game as long as you shuffle decently. Now another theme in this deck is discard. Blim causes discard, and I tried to put in some cards that cause each opponent to discard. So Tassiger's Cruelty, which you can end up playing for a single black mana, has each opponent discard 2 cards. Now you'll see why this is really handy. It's basically we want to disrupt our opponent's plan, which is a pretty standard Rakdos thing. Usually it's by making them sack permanents. But one of the things you do not want to do in this deck is let your opponents freely sack permanents, because they will simply sacrifice the things you've given them and kind of mess up your plan. So this is a Rakdos deck that is very, very minimal on the sacrifice, and that's a theme you're going to see continuing. My early iterations of this deck, I accidentally had stuff in here that was anti-synergistic, because I'd play something like Crack the Earth, and people would just sack the thing I gave them and be like, thank you, So rather than sacrifice, we often have discard cards in those sort of slots, I would say. And Tassiger's Cruelty is a very strong one, because if you're playing with 3 other opponents, that gets rid of 6 cards from their hand. It can really mess up somebody's later plan and maybe get rid of some of their removal. Because as you might have started to kind of realize, you don't really want to be messed with in your attacking phase. You want to be able to freely land some combat damage and give away something obnoxious. Alright, Swiftfoot Boots is good in here because you're going to need to protect your commander. Blim is going to become a target after a while once they realize what you're doing, so giving him hexproof can make a world of difference. Kardur Doom Scourge. He's actually just in here because I like him. He doesn't really have anything to do with Blim. He's just a nice drop that basically goads all your opponents. And just by sitting around, he can end up gaining you a bit of life through attackers dying and hurt your opponents a bit. So I just like the card. He could be something else. Soul Ring's a no-brainer and something we do play in our commander group in pretty much every deck, because why wouldn't you, I think I have maybe one deck that doesn't have it. Anyway, Demonic Lore. This is another must include and a very cheap card to get. This is amazing in this deck. You drop it on the board and draw 3 cards. Now, it's very crucial to note that you do not want this to stay around, because it is going to hurt you a lot. So you want to be prepared to make sure Blim is going to land if you're going to play this card. So you want to play this, of course, on your main before attacking with Blim, but you got to be pretty darn sure that you're going to be able to connect with Blim. Maybe your opponents are tapped out with no flyers and you know their interaction is low, or you know they might have a bounce and you have a Pyroblast ready or something. So super critical. Hold this until you know you can land with Blim in your combat phase. Drawing 3 cards for 3 mana is super nice, and then giving this away to an opponent that likes to have cards in their hand is going to hurt them a lot. So it's a perfect card to give away. It is one of the best cards in the deck to give away because it helps you and hurts them. And the one big drawback is they interrupt that attack. So plan this one carefully. If you can pull it off, it puts you way ahead in general. So I'm going to put that over here as a Blim card. Volcanic Offering, just an incredibly strong red card. This is one of those cards, well, this has nothing to do with Blim, I'll say. Yeah, I just like it because it's so strong. It basically blows up 2 of your opponent's lands and 2 of your opponent's creatures, and you can't really beat that value at instant speed, so it's just a nice thing to sit on as a removal. And it can fill multi-slots of remove lands, remove creatures, remove multiple creatures. Yeah, strong card, nothing to do with Blim. Temple of Malice, just a land. Don't particularly like Temple of Malice in these lands that come into play tap, but I kind of budgeted the land a bit here. There's no super expensive lands in here like I do in some of my decks, so that's why it's got the Temple of Malice. Phyrexian Arena, another just really strong card. You want to get this out early and get that card draw online. Keep your hand filled. Nothing really to do with Blim, but it could be, because if your opponent's at 1 life and you just need to give them something, Phyrexian Arena could be it. And if they have some other effect that they don't want to draw more cards. But in general, you don't want to give this away. It's just almost synergistic with Blim, but I would say this is really good in black decks in general. And kind of I would almost say an auto include. I know everyone doesn't play it. I like the card. Black tends to have ways to gain life, so it's generally just draw an extra card every turn, and it's very nice. Soul of Simulacrum. He's in here for the ramp mechanic more than anything. Really nothing to do with Blim here again. The Blim cards are a bit limited, but ramp is very nice. And having some things to not die too early is nice. Rakdos Signet, of course, it's, you know, good ramp. Now, Tiny Bones is in here specifically to the rest of the theme of the deck with the Blim. If you get your opponent to discard a card, you get to draw a card. So very nice. And he's got a mana dump on him for late. If you can manage to wreck your opponent's hand entirely, then you can make them start losing life. But there's a decent amount of discard, so Tiny Bones is really in here for the card advantage and just another thing for them to have to shenanigan with. So you don't want to give him away with Blim, but he's really in here because it's a Blim deck in the discard. Guild Commons is a Met card. Now, one thing about these bounce lands is I did specifically include them because of stuff like Spike Field that you might want to pick up late game. So this Guildless Commons just allows that sort of thing, even if it is a bit of a slow land. And you often will need this mana just for equipping and playing some of your artifacts and stuff. So it's a pretty strong land. I like it in this deck. I don't play it in too many decks, really. Xancha's a bit of a must include. She is super awesome here, because if you're not familiar with her, you basically play her and give her away, and she must attack each turn of Fable, and she can't attack you. So she already has what Blim wants, another permanent that an opponent controls but doesn't own, so she will make his trigger larger if you attack the person. And whoever controls Xancha is going to be swinging at one of your other opponents, so she kind of just helps you get in a better position in the game by making your opponents fight, and her little ability at the bottom can end up drawing you cards and wreck stuff. So Xancha's just, I think she's really good in general, but in this deck she's an auto include and a must play, so I'm going to put her in the Blim pile here. Skeletal Elemental, this I've gone back and forth on a bit. I think it's pretty good overall because you're going to try to play it and connect with somebody and get them to discard 2 cards, and then you give this away with Blim and they got to discard yet another card, and of course they don't get to keep it because at the end step they got to sack it. So I think this is just a really strong play to attack alongside with Blim and just get a massive discard on somebody. If someone's really pulling ahead and got a bunch of cards in their hand and you're pretty sure you can land this, it's a good way to just kind of shut them down and shut them off a bit. So I haven't got a whole lot of play testing in with that card yet, but in theory it sounds pretty good. Mountain. You'll notice we're playing some snow-covered mountains. There are reasons for this, but I think most of the reasons have came out of the deck. So snow-covered lands in general. So it doesn't matter. I don't think snow matters unless we see something. Sheoldred Whispering One. Now this is an interesting card. I considered not putting it in the deck, but it's just so strong. So it's a 6/6 Swamp Walk for 7 mana, and during your upkeep, you can return one of your own creatures from your yard to the battlefield, which is a perfectly fine ability for this deck. Get your own stuff. You're not messing up your Blim stuff and making you discard. And it does have a sack that I didn't think was too bad. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, that player sacks a creature. Now this is more positive than negative because, as I was saying earlier, we generally don't want people to sack. But this is specific to creatures, and a lot of the stuff we give away is artifacts and enchantments. and things, artifacts, enchantments, and things they're not going to hold on for long. If they have Xantia, you probably don't want to play Sheoldred, but so there's a few things that are anti-synergy, but being that he's 7 mana, you're probably going to have a pretty good idea, or he, whatever. Given that it's 7 mana, you're going to have a pretty good idea of the board state and whether it's a good idea to play this or not, and like 90% of the time it is, but there are times you want to hold back because they have the perfect thing to sack anyway, or that's yours or something. But yeah, just a really strong card. It's sort of specific to Blim, but also it's really not. It's just really good black, so I'm going to put it in the not specific to Blim pile. It's just really good and I like. Jessica's Will. Now, there's a quick little flowchart you can go through to see if you want to put this in your deck, and it's a very simple flowchart. Do you have red in your deck? Okay, play Jessica's Will. Alright, and Chaos Warp, another thing that's just really strong removal, and you can use it on your own stuff too. So that's another thing. I don't always play Chaos Warp in every red deck, even though it's pretty good in every red deck. It's just that when you put your target on the stack with Blim, if it's something you don't particularly want to get rid of, you could Chaos Warp your own thing, but most of the time you're going to probably remove something that's a real problem of your opponents, something that's indestructible, something like that. So Chaos Warp, it's semi-specific to Blim, but also it's just really pretty strong in general. I'm going to put it in the sort of specific to Blim pile. Alright, so we got Dreadhorde, just strong removal. It's sorcery speed. I'm not the biggest fan of this one. It might come out. Kirkkeep. I think this is a must include in this deck, because you can make these little kobolds and give them away or chump block with them. And giving them away is perfectly fine. They're 0/1 unless your opponent wants stuff to sack. It's just going to be another thing that you own and they control and trigger yet another discard and more life loss. So this is just a really strong land to have in here for the Blim shenanigans. And it's a relatively cheap card. I think it's only like $1 or something. Bedevil, super strong removal, instant speed artifact creature planeswalker. It's sort of a must include in any Rakdos deck, I think. Kind of same with Dismember, very strong removal, can get through indestructible and stuff. I tend to try to play those because, gods are very common in Commander. Torment of Hailfire. Now this is one of those things I was saying you want a lot of mana for, and it's a Goldspan can help that. Now this is sort of anti-synergistic because you're giving away stuff, but usually if you get the late game, you just need something to close it out, and Torment's one of those cards where you can pop off with a lot of mana and just close out a game. So I think it's okay here. And there might be better cards for this, like there's that one that I think it's Exannuate, whatever it is. That one might, in theory, be better in this deck because they're going to be sacking stuff you give them, so they're not going to mind. But also at the same time, they're probably going to have a small hand because of all our stuff making them discard all game. So they're not going to have many things to discard. It's just going to be able to close out games is the whole point here. It's not really that specific to Blim, just really strong. Rakdos Charm, really strong. This is actually semi-specific to Blim, as we'll see some combos with it later. Rakdos Charm. If you don't know what it is, don't know what it does. If you have these two colors in your deck, you probably already have this in your deck. Because of these options are very strong. Just destroying an artifact is good. That's super good. You can make someone's creatures hit them. And if someone's got a giant amount of tokens or just made 40 tokens and is trying to go off, you can be like, Rakdos Charm, all your tokens hit you. So this can just end games on its own. Destroying artifacts is always good. And exiling all cards from someone's yard can often shut off some living death effect where they're getting everything back. So just a really, really strong instant to sit on. And it does have 1 or 2 combos in here to help close out games. So I'm going to put it in this sort of specific to Blim. It's all first mine, just a snow tap land with special there. Alright, Beat-Deck, Bedevil. I've gone back and forth with this one a lot. It's not really that specific to Blim. I just like it as a removal card because on this side you can negative something down or pump up something of yours. And on this side we do have some non-basic land removal and hitting them or their planeswalker. Probably going to end up coming out, to be honest, because it doesn't have anything specific to Blim. I just try to put in a decent amount of land destruction because there tends to be a lot of problematic lands in Commander in general. There's always something someone has that's kind of ruining the game, whether it be some sort of Lotus or something. And just having that option, on the fallback side, you could still kill something with 3 or less toughness at instant speed. So I just like the card. A Bloodstained Buyer with gold border because it was cheaper. Grave Cairns, nothing special there, just a nice land. Tibalt's Trickery, sort of clutch in this deck because you want to save this for a long time. Don't play this too early. You can always play it on your own weak spell. You can counter a Soul Ring or a Rock late game or whatever and get something else. Or you can counter someone's bomb and they might get a Land of War Elves or something. It's a really strong counter, but it's a little risky, like Chaos Warp. It's not that specific to Blim other than it helps protect your combo. Because if you really need something to land, like for example, you really need to give away this demonic lore, or it's going to hit you for 7 or 8 damage or something, maybe even more, then Tumult's Trickery is the card to have to kind of back up your plan so they can't destroy Blim or whatever. So it's semi-specific to Blim. I'm going to put it there. I think it's really strong in general, though. Lightning Greaves, no-brainer. Protect your guys, give them haste. Really just a no-brainer there. That's in every deck. It's any deck with creatures anyway, creature-based. Snow-covered mountain. Alright, Shredded Sails. I just like this card. It might end up coming out. I love the options of destroy an artifact, hit a flyer, or just cycle it away. So you can't really go wrong with this in a deck. It's just a solid common, and something you should be playing if you don't have, tons of money into your deck. It's a really good budget card, basically. So, not specific to that. Batterskull. I like Batterskull here. It's kind of tricky. It is a bit specific to Blim. The life link is often needed. The vigilance is often needed because usually you only have 1 or 2 creatures, so you don't really want to tap out because people swing at you. Life link becomes pretty critical. There's not a whole lot of life gain in this deck, and you can get clapped pretty quickly without it. So another kind of little trick here is really expensive to pull off, so it's not really worth it, is you can give away either the Batterskull or the Germ, and then you can either re-equip the Batterskull with something else after you give away the Germ, or you can bounce the Batterskull after you have the give it away trigger on the stack. So it's semi-specific to Blim, but really hard to pull off just because of the sheer amount of mana involved in pulling that one off. I guess the return is not that expensive, but that's not ideal because you're going to have to play it again. So yeah, I guess you could shenanigan this in to get attacks in, but it's only semi. I don't think it's like that good, although the lifelink and the vigilance can win games for real. Keyrune, a nice little rock that can turn into a 3/1 first strike. This little 3/1 first strike can really surprise people. They always forget about your mana rocks being creatures. So that's really the only reason it's in here, not specific to Blim once again. Valky, God of Lies. I wouldn't call this specific to Blim, and it is even in some ways maybe anti-synergistic, but you often just want to see if someone has a counter or not, so you can play Valky and look at their hand. Or on the reverse side, of course, he is extremely strong. You may have seen to Bolt, Cosmic Imposter, very popular card. Now, I guess the big thing is being able to exile an artifact or creature can be really handy. But if nothing else, then you can at least start grabbing cards off the top of people's decks. You want to be careful about playing their permanents because they're going to trigger Blim on you. So you're mostly looking for instants, sorceries, and stuff like that. But you got to be real careful about this. But it's so good that it's kind of a just have to include. This is double sleeves, so me pulling it in and out all the time isn't going to scuff it up a bunch. Alright, we got Davriel. I've considered not playing this guy. He's only iffy. The big problem is his discard's kind of weak. It's target player, so I try to put mostly stuff in here that's multiplayer discard, if it does discard. But his little passive, just for having him out, is pretty good. It's just going to do 2 damage during each opponent's upkeep if they have 1 or fewer cards in hand, which can be pretty common in the late game. So he's kind of iffy, semi-specific to the theme. Mogus Goddess Slaughter is really just in here to try to close out games. He does allow them to sacrifice a creature, so he's not necessarily a strong include. But it turns out that oftentimes them sacking a creature's fine because you can get Blim through, and it's not that bad. It's mainly you want to avoid giving them the freedom to sack a permanent of their choice, but we also are still pretty light on it. So just another way to try to close out games, basically. And he's a 7/5 indestructible, so once he's out there, he's usually out there for good. I'm going to say it's not specific to Blim. He's just in there to put strong cards in the deck. Castle Longthwain is very good. Not really that specific to Blim. Mayhem Devil is also just very good. He's semi-specific because there are a lot of times when we're going to choose something and sack it, so he's going to get triggers off that, and he triggers off of every sack your opponents do, which they're going to do naturally with how their deck works because everybody plays some sort of sacrifice something. So he's just in here because he's a strong card basically, and semi-synergistic with everything all the time. Forgotten Cave, nothing special there, just land. Canarium, so we can pick up our bounce land or spell lands like I was talking about earlier. There's a few more of those. Court of Ambition. I think this card is incredibly strong and underrated. It's gonna hit your opponents every turn. Most of the time they're going to take the life loss, but eventually they're going to be forced to start discarding or lose the game, and you getting the Monarch is going to draw you cards. This deck really likes to hold Monarch because it tends to have a lot of ways to try to sneak that Blim attack through or something through, but I really just like this card in general. Also, the sheer amount of removal. We can often stop someone trying to take Monarch, so I really just like this card in general. It is sort of specific for the discard, because we want to empty our opponent's hands and get them drawing nothing. Canyon Slough, I just like the land. Cycling, Smoldering Marsh, gotta have it. Terminate, another nice removal card. And Snow-Covered Mountain. Tyrite Sanctum's kind of specific to Blim. You often want to use this on him and get him to the indestructible state, so people will stop messing with him and he can stay out there. But also, I think this card is just really strong. It is another one of those things you can choose and then sack in indestructible count or something. So it's decently synergistic with this deck, but I think this is just a really strong commander card in general that most people don't have their eye on. So I think this is a card to pick up before it gets expensive, honestly. Tyrite Sanctum. Stun Predator. I really like this guy. He's not that specific to Blim other than we can sack the creatures that we choose, potentially, if we don't want him to get one of our creatures. But him becoming tapped and exiling things from people's yards is clutch sometimes, because often, you know, people will be sitting on something with flashback or something that they discarded that they're okay with using later. So his exile is very strong. I did have Clean the Dust here, but I ended up putting Stun Predator in place of Clean the Dust because it's a board state. It's a nice flyer that can be really troublesome for your opponent to deal with. So semi-specific to Blim. Humble Defector, he's awesome in this deck because you can double giveaway. Like, you can put the giveaway trigger on the stack targeting him and then tap him and give him away anyway. So it's like he was, I don't know, it's kind of like a free giveaway. Or you can give away something else and give away him, and then they have to discard even more cards and lose more life. So even better on the Blim triggers with him. So yeah, he's pretty specific to Blim, but I also just like the card. Also, just to go back a little bit here, you know, Davriel's sort of like the card The Rack, which is a classic card, but the Rack only targets one opponent. This at least gives some discard and at least hits all opponents, so that's why it's in there over the Rack. I did look at the Rack and think, but nah, it doesn't seem good enough. Alright, Abrade, just a strong card. Now here is the Snow-Covered Land effect, the Draugr Necromancer. I'm not 100% on this guy. I just really like that he removes your opponent's creatures from the game and you can potentially cast them. But the thing is, you don't necessarily want to have a bunch of your opponent's creatures with Blim. Now, sometimes it's fine. Sometimes you control when you trigger him. You don't have to attack Blim. So if you've got a big army of other stuff, you can just leave Blim back as a blocker. He's actually a kind of great blocker, being that he has flying and stuff. So there is kind of some things where you can get your opponent's creatures, like with the Necromancer, but he just shuts off people's yards so good that I thought he kind of needed to be in here. I think this is a really strong card that's kind of overlooked right now as well. You just have to play all your snowlands, though. Place all your basic snowlands if he's in your deck. But yeah, I really like Draugr Necromancer. I haven't seen him really played. Like, every time I played Blim, I haven't drew him, so I haven't had much interaction to really test. He's not specific to Blim, though. He's just really great at shutting off yards and creature recursion and stuff. Right, Feed the Swarm. I like this card. The life loss can be pretty detrimental, but black and yeah, these two colors, Rakdos in general, has very few enchantment removal other than like Chaos Warp and Feed the Swarm. So it's in here just to have something. But yeah, I'm kind of questioning whether this card's good or not. It's not particularly bad, but sometimes it's like you need to get rid of a 6 CMC enchantment and it would just cause so much life loss that you could lose the game. So there's that downside. And it being sorcery speed hurts, but at least it's targeted enchantment removal. One of the few in the deck. So it's in here just kind of to fill that void, basically. Rakdos Locket, I went back and forth on whether this was worth including or not. The big point is you can sack it, draw cards. So you can put Blim's trigger on the stack on it, and then sack it, draw 2 cards. Or late game, you can draw 2 cards with a rock, which is always super nice feeling when you got like 11 mana or whatever, and you're like, I just need cards. At least you got this to draw 2. So it's semi-synergistic. If I did not have Blim in here, I wouldn't include it. It's just too expensive of a mana rock, but since you can sack it, it seems to be worth it as a target sometimes, maybe. You gotta have some kind of option available if you're going to attack with Blim. That's kind of the bottom line here. Because like I said earlier, it's very important that you have something you plan on targeting if the damage connects. Because if you don't, you're giving away something that's just going to end up helping your opponent and hurting you. So something like this, if you got nothing else, it's a decent target, since you can sack it with it on the stack. Alright, Soul Seer, more removal. I'm kind of noticing the sheer amount of removal in this deck at this point. I love that this can kill indestructibles and it can hit planeswalkers. I think it's an incredibly strong removal card in Commander. Command Tower, of course. Now this is an extremely specific Blim card. You won't see this anywhere except Blim as far as I know. Immortal Coil. Now, this basically reads, it's the last line that's really important. When there are no cards in your graveyard, you lose the game. So immediately right there, you think, okay, you give this to your opponent, they got no cards in their yard, they lose. And that is the plan. That's something that works well with Rakdos Charm, where you can just give them this and then remove yards and it's over for them. And that is devastating. But also when you play this on the board, you got to watch out, because if they have a Rakdos Charm, they could play it before you get to resolve anything and you lose the game. So this is a really risky card, but I would say if you're going to play this, either make sure your opponent's tapped out or you know they don't have any interaction to remove your yard, and maybe even be sitting on a Tibalt's Trickery just in case. So very risky, high risk, high reward card. It can win you the game, but it can also lose you the game. But usually, like, the optimal play with this is you play it, and before you give it away, like, you put the trigger on the stack targeting it, before it actually goes to them, you tap it, remove 2 of your cards, and draw a card, because why not? You might as well get a card out of the deal, which is super nice. And then it goes to them and they lose a bit of life. Now, it's notable that the life loss doesn't trigger this middle part that says, if damage would be dealt to you, prevent that damage and remove a card in your graveyard for each 1 damage prevented in this way. So Blim's going to hit, that damage is already going to happen. This is going to go to them. They're going to discard a card and lose a bit of life. Since it's loss of life, this can't prevent it, so it doesn't happen immediately. But if it goes around the board a little bit and someone else hits them with stuff and removes their yard, they die. Generally, if you have this card on your board, if you don't die immediately from it, you're going to die at some point and you need to get rid of it. So this is a Blim all-star. There's a couple others I considered as like all-stars for ending the game when you give it control, but this seems to take the cake as one of the best to give away because it just ends the game immediately, potentially. Yeah, very, very good. Very Blim specific. All right, Weathered Runestone. This is another one that's sort of like Dampening Sphere, as its reason for being in the deck. It's kind of a nice effect, and it doesn't matter who controls it, so it's going to shut off people's recursion. We have very little recursion in here. The only real recursion is Shielded, which we saw earlier. So it will shut off your Shielder. You got to watch out for that. But in general, someone's probably going to deal with this before that, because you'll give it away with Blim. Someone's going to get super annoyed that they can't cast spells from their graveyard or library, because they're going to be trying to pull off some shenanigan and be like, that card's ruining my stuff. And yeah, non-land permanents in graveyards and libraries can't enter the battlefield. Shuts off casting, shuts off permanents coming back from the graveyard or library. Yes, so where it does have a tiny bit of anti-synergy, I think the anti-synergy is going to be way higher for your opponents, and you can give it away and it's fine. So I think it's a good include in this deck overall. Yeah, I can't think of anything it shuts down other than your Shielded Crater, but that's going to be a really niche scenario, and you're going to be able to control that generally. And I really think that someone is just going to blow this up before you get to her, and if they aren't, then they're lacking removal and they got bigger problems. So it's just a really strong Blim card. Rogue's Passage, this is a Blim card because sometimes you need to make him unblockable so you can get that trigger off, and this is a way to do it. It's also a really nice commander card in general because, in case you don't know, it says target creature. It's not target creature you control. If you can make deals with people and say, hey, if you want to attack with that 20/20 that doesn't have trample over there, I might do something, and then you can be like, hit your opponent, make it unblockable. And yeah, there's just some political shenanigans. So I guess that's another quick note about the way we play Commander. We tend to be pretty political as far as kind of how our decks are. We just find that to be fun, I think. So not all groups are like that, you know. So makes Rogue's Passage even better. I'm going to put it over here in the Blim specific because it would not be in here if it weren't for Blim. All right, Deflecting Swat. This is a no-brainer. If you got it, include it. There are some other cards you could put in place, but it's another deal that goes with, hey, you want your Blim trigger to go off. Yeah, I want to put it in the semi-synergistic. Just you want to pull off them combos, you got to have some interaction ready. Wishclaw Talisman. I used to have Demonic Tutor in the slot, but I figured this was better because, well, you can give it away and trigger more discards. Of course, your opponent can use it during their turn, but I don't know, I'm still kind of questioning the slot. It seems okay, but I need more playtesting. Ideally, though, the thing to do would be to pull up something like Immortal Coil, and then give them the Coil and the Wishclaw, and then they're going to lose the game anyway or something. So You typically want to try to avoid your opponent using it again, but sometimes it might not be that bad. If it's down to the last 2 people anyway or something, they're going to have to give it back and they'll want to. But I think this is a pretty good include here. I think it fits pretty well. You can activate it at any time during your turn, so you could pull up, you would go snag a deflecting SWAT on your turn at instant speed and deal with an interaction if you just want to have this at the ready. This is just a really good card to have at the ready during your turn, I think. So it's semi-synergistic with Blim. I'm going to put it in the Blim specific. I don't think I would have it in here if this was not a Blim deck. I don't know. I can't say that for sure, I guess. It's probably in the maybes. Bojuka Bog, this does work with Immortal Coil. It's got to be in here. It's just a really good card in every black deck anyway. So I'm going to put it in this sort of. Soul Shatter, it's one of the strongest removals to come out in a while, being that it does this to each opponent and it can hit planeswalkers, and they got to get rid of their biggest CMC. It's like 99% of the time this is devastating for all your opponents. It's a really strong play. It kind of reminds me of like Volcanic Offering and its strength, except it's a lot cheaper. So just really strong commander grouping cards there. Swamp. We got Kroxa. He's nice because he makes each opponent discard a card and he can come back. So mainly it's the each opponent discarding a card that sold me on him. And yeah, it's just a really strong card. If you got it, include it. He's going in the sort of synergistic here. Bonder's Enclave. Being that Blim has 4 power, it's going to be pretty easy to draw cards with this. So I think it's kind of a must include. Yeah, we'll put him in the sort of synergistic. It's mostly with Blim's 4 power though. That synergizes. Mind Stone, another rock you can sack. You got it. It's really good with Blim and in general. Strip Mine, another similar deal, something you could put on the stack, targeting and then sack the Strip Mine so they get nothing. And also, yeah, you heard me earlier, I like having some land removal because of really problematic lands that can just, make games a real struggle. So pretty synergistic, but also I just like the card. Agrimole, nice removal or land card. Don't feel bad about playing it because as you saw, we did have several ways to pick up these things later in the game, which is always nice. Mountain. Maze Mine Tome. I think this card's really strong. Generally what you want to do with this is get this up to 3 counters ASAP, then sit on that 4th one for either the giveaway trigger and then sack it before they get it, or I don't know, use it as you need it, I guess. It's just a pretty decent card overall, and it kind of fits decently well in this deck because of the additional shenanigans you can pull off by sacking it. And the life gain can come in clutch too. So I just like this card. I think it belongs in a lot of commander decks in general, especially if you have kind of a low budget. Alright, we got the Burnished Heart. I just like this card. You can do the whole sack thing, so it makes it a little bit better in this particular deck, but it's so expensive to do that it's going to be kind of hard to pull off. Generally, you just want to get this out and get your 2 lands ASAP, because it's a Burnished Heart. Sword of Feast and Famine. This synergizes really well with the deck in general. I mean, obviously it's a really strong card, but if you have a bunch of swords and you have to pick kind of the best one for the deck, I think it's probably something like this one, because it does make them discard, which is what you want, and very nice. And also, of course, it untaps all your lands, so you can have a really nice second main, and it's kind of protection too. So if you get to choose your sword, this one is a pretty solid one. I also really like Light Shadow for the deck. I think it feels okay too, maybe. That's not in here right now. So yeah, that's the sword that is probably the most synergistic with Blim. Correct me if I'm wrong. Of course, all the swords are good. You could probably make a case for any of the swords, but this is a low equipment deck overall. We have the 2 haste ones and sword, and I think that's it. And Batterskull, I guess, so 4 equipment. All right, next up we have, I never know how to say this, Arterial Flow. It's like an artery flow, I guess is what it means. Yeah, each opponent discards 2 cards. Perfect. That's what we want. We want to make all our opponents discard cards. So mid-game, when there's like a lot of people with like 2-3 cards in hand, and they're often holding something they're just waiting for the right play for, this can be so detrimental, as with any of the discards, of course. But you don't need me to tell you that. This one's just really nice because it reads each opponent. The vampire thing's a total bonus. There's not a whole lot of vampires in here. I think maybe 1. So you're probably not going to get that second part, but it doesn't matter a whole lot. Commander Sphere, I just really like it because you can sack it and it's free to sack. So it works pretty well with Blim as far as picking a trigger. Ugin. Now this is not really specific to Blim. I've just noticed Ugin is really good if you don't have other ways to deal with things. So this deck doesn't really have ways to deal with enchantments in general, but his negative X, of course, is the big thing. You just want to be able to wipe the board sometimes of really, really troublesome indestructible gods, whatever it may be. So there are times when this is literally the only thing that will save you, and he's basically in here in place of a board wipe. I used to play Damnation in this deck. I think I took Damnation out for Ugin. Yeah, obviously just really strong, but really expensive. And yeah, you kind of got to have him sometimes. I feel like well, I will just say he's not specific to Blim at all, so he's going in the I just like it pile. Baron Moor, Cycling Land, Fellware Stone, just nice ramp, nothing specific there. Sangromancer, it's going to synergize nicely with your discard, and it is the one vampire in the deck, so it is going to work with the additional life. So a bit of life gain, a bit of nice board state, another flyer and up there, and yeah, your opponent discarding, gaining life is going to be super nice. And I just like the card. It's semi-synergistic, but I'm not sure if it's that great of a slot in the deck, to be honest. Opposition Agent is really in here, nothing specific to Blim again, just to shut off people's combos, or if you know someone's ready to find a specific card and win the game, you can play the Opposition Agent. Of course, it's just a strong card. You just want to be careful about grabbing their creatures or permanents and playing them, because Blim is going to, of course, make you discard and lose life if you do that. So you got to keep in mind how you use this. You can't just go buck wild with it and grab their best thing necessarily. Sometimes you can be like, okay, I'm just going to grab this instant or sorcery to interact with, or maybe something I can use and then sacrifice. Something you don't want to sit on your board necessarily, but use your best judgment based on how the game is going. I'm going to say this is not specific to Blim. It's just kind of another interaction. Vandal Blast, this is probably going to come out of the deck, I think, maybe, but I like the card just because it blows up all your opponent's artifacts, or you can just single target one. Vandal Blast is just really strong in Commander in general. It's not specific to Blim. Prismatic Vista, another sack land because it's nice. Fix your mana, target it, sack it if you want. Alright, Treacherous Blessing. This is a super all-star. I think it's better than Demonic Lore. It comes into play and you draw 3 cards. Very nice. Whenever you cast a spell, lose a life. Whenever this becomes a target of anything, you sack it. So you just target it with Blim's trigger and it sacks. Super nice. Very easy to get rid of. You only play it if you have a way to target it, which should be Blim. These are very similar cards. I think the Blessing's a little better. Demonic Lore is super good too, though. This can be better if your opponent's losing a bunch of life from it. I like them both. They're both kind of must-includes because of Blim. Ridge, a Deathbringer Regent, not specific to Blim. Just a really nice board wipe and a body to sit on the board afterwards, which is just required sometimes. So you'll notice I've cut it down to, I think there's only 2 board wipes, and he's one of them against the other. Am I wrong? There might be another one. I don't know, but you got to run at least a couple things to reset the board potentially in every deck, I feel like, or else you're going to run into a scenario where you just can't come back because someone's so far ahead. It's just a commander. Good, great commander card, Deathbringer. All right, next up we have Dowsing Dagger. This card is super good. It can almost go in every single commander deck without fail. Just because if you get to flip this on like turn 3 or 4, getting that Lotus, in case you don't know, I'll just show you. Yeah, you can pause and read if you want. It's not super special. It's just if you connect with a creature, and in general with this deck, you want to be connecting with Blim anyway, so you're probably going to try to get this to flip in the meantime. In the same time, you get the Lost Veil, which adds 3 mana of any color. If you can get this early on, it's such a massive mana ramp that it's so nice. But in Rakdos, you need some critical mana ramp, and this can be the thing. So really strong card for the mana ramp. Not that specific to Blim, but kind of specific to Rakdos because you need something like this. You do give away 2 plants, but that doesn't matter because most of your guys fly anyway. Bone Crusher Giant. I just like Bone Crusher Giant. He's not that specific. The preventing damage thing not being allowed for the rest of the turn can be very relevant sometimes when you need to get damage for Blim through, so that can be real. But he's just really a good card, so I like him. That's mainly why he's in here. And last, Arcane Signet, because you gotta have it. All right, and that's the deck. You saw kind of the critical cards. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, wait, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 cards in here that maybe only 9. I think he's kind of just good in general. So there's kind of 9 cards in here that are like very Blim specific, a bunch that are just synergistic, and a bunch that are just good in general. I think this artillery flow, a lot of these discard I didn't put in the right pile probably because discard is kind of a secondary theme. Also, in theory, this whole pile over here that's not that specific to Blim could and probably will at some point start being swapped out for cards that synergize better with Blim as I kind of come across them. I guess the stack includes lands too, but there, as you saw, there are plenty that aren't really synergistic with the rest of the theme and just good cards that could be swapped to cards that are more synergistic, like these ones or these ones. The thing about these ones is a lot of these are specific that, like, if you don't have Blim, you can't even play these. Like, you can't play this if you don't have Blim ready. These you can, but they're just nice. I guess these ones you don't really want to play either, so there's kind of like 5 cards, and we'll say 3 cards. Just 3 cards in particular you don't even want to play at all unless you have Blim. These are still okay even if you don't have Blim. So I'm really careful about this slot because these can be dead cards if you can't get your commander through, or if people just have ways of continuously dealing with your commander. So you don't want too many of these or you'll end up with a bunch of dead cards in your hand potentially. You want stuff that's still useful anyway. That's just good commander practice in general. Okay, for real, let's talk about the cards. that kind of almost made it into the deck or were considerations. Some of them are specific to Blim, others are just good cards that I think might be better removal or something like that. So really this is kind of just a pile of cards that at one point may have been in the deck. There's one I couldn't find that I wanted to show, and I'm just going to say it first. Goblin Psychopath. I wanted to put that in the deck. I'll try to remember to edit and leave a picture here, but Goblin Psychopath just seems so funny to mess around with. It's not good. It's really not good, but where else would you ever play it other than potentially Blim and give it to someone and hope for the best? It's just funny, you know, the funny card. Alright. Molten Blast, kind of like a Braid. A Braid's kind of directly better, so that one just costs more. Crush, more artifact removal that didn't quite make it in. Curse of Chaos. Now, there's something really neat about these enchant players. The effect is kind of okay, but it could help your opponent some, so it's not the best. It didn't make it in, but the thing about these curses is it doesn't matter who controls them. Once someone's enchanted, the effect remains the same. So you can enchant someone, give this away, and then whoever technically controls it is going to get the discards from Blim's combat triggers. So it's just kind of a shenanigan you could pull off. So this is like a Blim thing that could work too if you got it and don't have some of the other cards or whatever. Wall of Stone. This is a great pillow fort card because you often just need to survive for a bit to get set up. So having something like this instead of removal might be really nice because you can just sit back and less people will attack you if you're just going to block it. Nothing's going to happen. They'll be more incentivized to attack your opponents if you're sitting Wall of Stone. So this is kind of one of those cards that just kind of helps you get to the late game. And you could give it away if nothing else because most of our stuff is flying or swamp walk. So if you have to give it away, it's not the worst for you. So this has been considered. I think it's actually good. It might end up going back in for something. I really like this. Just it's such a big blocker. Block 6/6s, 7/7s. It's great. It really changes the flow of a commander game more than you would think, just having a big wall out there sometimes. But obviously it's not in there right now, but it could make its way back in. There's something nice about just playing a Wall of Stone and people being like, what? Your deck's terrible. I'm not going to kill you, you know? So it's kind of a mind game too, I will say. Shredded Sails, that is in the deck. Light Up the Stage. We didn't see this one. This does belong in the deck, I think. It's really strong for red in general. This is probably going to find its way in the deck, I think. So I don't know, let's put it somewhere. Cathartic Reunion. This might find its way in the deck too. I think this is just a really strong card as well. It's kind of like a mini Wheel of Fortune or a mini Windfall just for you. I like the card. I'm not playing it yet, but it might go in there. Revenge of Ravens. I thought about playing this just to kind of pillow for it a little more, but I really don't like the casting cost, and the effect ends up being too small most of the time, especially if they're just swinging with big creatures anyway. But if they got a bunch of tiny 1/1s or something, it's super nice. So it's just kind of questionable, but could be in the deck. Kind of fits with that slot, I guess, except that you don't ever want to give this away. That'd be bad to give away. Tragic Flip, strong removal, can get through indestructible. I kind of like it. Not in the deck though. Davril, he is in the deck. He might come out though. I don't know. We'll see. Tormentor, he's just another one that lets you draw more cards or hurt your opponent. He's not in there right now, but he might find his way in. I kind of like him, and he's got flying. And as we kind of talked about, the sack of creatures not a huge deal. Still not giving them the option to sack enchantments or artifacts or other things. Worst case scenario, they might sack like one of your kobolds in game or something. But the sack creatures generally not too bad to deal with. So that'll probably find its way in. It's a really good card to have just for your general board state, I think. Retreat to Hydra. I thought about having this in because this Death Touch could help your Blim get through. People won't want to block it. And even if you don't have that, it's still going to gain you some life. I think this is a good card. I don't have it in there though. I just considered it. I've considered Megrim as well. It's here. Megrim just for the discard stuff, but it doesn't seem to be quite synergistic enough. Like there will be a lot of times where we just sit out there and do nothing, potentially, or maybe only trigger once or twice, which isn't quite worth it. So I just figured there'd be better stuff that's more interactive. But it's not bad. It's not bad. If you're really heavy on the discard, then it could be even better. Eldest Reborn, I think this is pretty solid. The CMC is a little high, but having them sack a creature planeswalker is fine. Having each opponent discard is fine, really good actually. And then you get to get something from anywhere under your control. Ideally, you want to grab your stuff unless they got some absolute bomb. But I feel like this card has a lot of potential, and it might find its way into the deck soon. I just don't like that 5 CMC. It's often just too slow, and they just sack a crappy token or something anyway. But we'll see. Another strong removal card here that can get through everything, basically. Get through Indestructible and stuff and Exile. So I really like this as a removal card. I often play it if I'm on a budget, just because it's worth nothing, and it's just so powerful as far as what it can get rid of. Unnerve, another thing that reads your opponent's discard 2 cards. This didn't find, I think this was in here once, and then I found Tassiger's Cruelty and Arterial Flow. So there's just cheaper ways to have each opponent discard 2 cards. But if you want yet another method, Unnerve's not bad. It's just more expensive than the others, basically. Undying Evil, I really like this because you could just get Blim right back or something right back that they kill, but it's not that specific to Blim. Pretty strong common too if you're on a budget. Undying Evil here. Better in creature heavy decks and stuff with a lot of ETB effects, of course, but not really Blim specific. We got Poison the Cup. I think this is really strong removal from Kautheim, and the Scry too can be incredibly relevant sometimes. So I just like the card. It's a good removal card if you're lacking other stuff. Valve Torment I think is pretty good too. It's another one of those things where, well, as with any enchantment aura, it does not matter who controls it. Kit Sail just to help with the discard a little bit, and a flyer. Carrion Feeder, I was kind of looking for things to kind of sack some of my own creatures potentially, but I ended up with the Emmerstrom Predator. So Carrion Feeder was at one point considered. Now Elder Fang Disciple, I think this is pretty good. I had it in there for a while, but I took it out. ETB, each opponent discards a card, which is what you want, but it turns out that discarding 2 cards is better, and she's just a 1/1 body, so she's not that relevant of a creature. It's basically 2 mana to have each opponent discard a card, and I felt like with the other cards, they were just better. So, didn't make it in, but it's still good. It's something you could include. Mog Assassin, I just like this card, it's just funny. I feel like it wouldn't be bad to give this away, because then especially if you have hexproof, or some way to protect your Blim or your creatures, then they just have to, this is just going to hurt their stuff basically, right? So, in theory, this could be pretty good, and it's fine to give away in the deck. Mog Assassin. Probably not going to find many other homes. Can we get a focus? I don't know, whatever. Mog Assassin. It's not that great. It's very, very iffy for this deck. I would say probably not in general. Squee, I thought it'd just be funny to give away, and I was considering playing something else that would make him better, which I'll show. Rankle. Rankle, I've been questioning whether he goes in the deck or not, but if you have Squee, you can always discard Squee. That's the thing. You can get everyone to discard, you can get everyone to sack, you can get everyone to draw. It's got Flying and Haste. I don't know. I've gone back and forth about whether he should be in the deck, and the answer so far has been no. But that might change. Squee, I don't think this is ever going in the deck, to be honest. I just have this pile. Nighthawk Scavenger, it's another vampire. Make no mistake, this card is really good. It's a really, really good body. Flying, Death Touch, Lifelink, and it's usually like a 6/3, 3 mana. This card's actually, I think, highly underrated. You know, it's a vampire rogue, pretty good creature types. So this is just a card I really like, not that specific to Blim, but for real, just having this card in your deck, like, wins games. I've seen it in Standard so many times, I would not be surprised if it became really relevant in Commander. Because if you have this up, people can't really attack you. They're going to lose whatever they're attacking you with. And yeah, he's just really good. This is another card, Aggressive Mining, that I really thought about having in here for a long time. If you give this to someone very early and they can't play lands anymore, they're kind of done for the game until they remove this. And the other thing, sack a land, draw 2 cards. You might want to do that before you give it away if you got a ton of lands. So this has a potential huge upside of just ruining your opponent, but also the backfire could be, it's late game anyway, doesn't matter. I don't know. I've been iffy about this one. It's potentially completely a dead card, so I didn't want to have too many of those like I was talking about earlier, so it didn't end up going in yet. But if you have this and play it in Blim, let me know. I think it could be pretty interesting. I'm going to put that somewhere, maybe in the giveaway pile. The potential Blim giveaways here. Terragrid, I think this card is good, but it simply does not belong. And that is because if you play them on this side, you end up with a bunch of their permanents, and you end up getting wrecked by your own Blim, discarding your whole hand, losing a bunch of life. So if you played him on the Terragrid side, it could be pretty anti-synergistic accidentally. And although it's a really good card and I really wanted to play it, it doesn't seem to quite fit here. It would be better somewhere else. Not the right Rakdos over here. And the Lantern's not bad either. You could potentially do a lot of damage. It is target player. If this said each opponent or something, I would definitely play this, but since it doesn't, it went in the maybe for a long time and I never played it. I don't think it's quite right for Blim. Thorn of Black Rose, just for the Monarch and the Death Touch. You can include it if you need more card draw, don't have some other stuff. It's a good card, make no mistake. It's pretty darn good. There's a foil scavenger, we already have one of those. Zat's Will, I'm not entirely sure if this is good. Just being able to exile someone's yard and get a bunch of thralls could be really nice because you can give them away. And making each opponent sack a creature with the greatest power. The casting cost is a bit high though at 5, so I didn't end up including it mostly because of that. but potentially a pretty good card. Yeah, I don't know what pile to put this in over here, I guess. Runescarred Demon, I think this is pretty good. You kind of want a few tutors to be able to get your combos. I didn't end up including him, but I feel like he's probably going to end up in the deck. I really love that he's a 6/6. There's often a lot of 4/5s or 4/4s or 5/5s that are a problem, and he just outclasses them with that 6/6. And he tutors for a card when he comes into play, which you want for Blim. Yeah, I think he fits pretty good. He's probably going to find his way in the deck. I'm going to put him in this pile that I spoke more highly of. Tavesh Zat, Doom of Fools. If there's any deck he goes in, it is probably this one, just because these thralls you can make, you can give away, and it's pretty nice to give away little useless 0/2s, so they gotta get clapped by more effects by Blim, discard more, sack more, and he's got card draw on him, so I feel like he's decent. I don't know. I just didn't feel like he was quite good enough. He might find his way in the deck eventually. I at least gotta try him at some point. Animate Dead, although this is really good, just the whole fact that you should never be grabbing your opponent's stuff kind of ruins it for me. Although you could give this Animate Dead away, because like I was talking about earlier with these other auras, it does not matter who controls the aura, the effect on the creature is the same. Or wait, would this transfer ownership of the creature too? I don't know. So Animate Dead, while it seemed really good, I just had some doubts about how good it actually was in this particular deck because of the old ownership and control factor potentially being bad if you grab one of their amazing creatures or something from their yard. But the reality is it probably should be in the deck. It's just such a strong card. So I don't know, I'll leave it here. Noxious Gearhulk, just a strong card. I'm probably going to put it in place of one of those removals that you saw in the deck, because this gets you a board state and its removal, and it doesn't have any anti-synergy with Blim. It's not particularly synergistic with Blim, but it's just a really strong card, and it doesn't drag him back at all. It's any sacrifice stuff that might be bad. Alright, Black Sun Zenith. I just really like this card. I think it's a great board wipe, but I didn't end up including it. Viscera Seer, just a way to sack our own stuff, can be handy, but other than that, it's not necessarily the best card in the set. You probably know what this card does, but just in case you don't, yeah, that's all it does. Dance of the Dead, sort of the same story as Animate Dead. I feel like Animate Dead's a little bit better. Already talked about that one. Author of Shadows. This guy's pretty good. I think I'm going to include him in the long run. Just that he exiles your opponent's graveyard, which is perfect for the Immortal Coil, and you potentially get something you need. Like we've been talking about, you probably don't want to get one of their permanents, but you might anyway if it's worth it. You still cast a big instant or sorcery or something that you might need. So I think this card is really good, and maybe not rated high enough yet. We'll see. Really strong card, and sort of synergistic, being that exile the graveyard is pretty relevant. A Braid, we already talked about a Braid. Malakir Rebirth, sort of like Undying Evil, except that you lose a bit of life, and it can potentially be a land. This is a good card. Make no mistake about it. Malakir Rebirth is a good card. Be sure to synchronize or sync this card right, because yeah, you got to play it when you know your thing's gonna die. So you respond to stuff. And, yeah, you know. I've just done it wrong before and not got the trigger, so I feel like I had to mention it. There's Cling the Dust we talked about earlier. It's not bad. It only gets rid of one thing at a time, but it can potentially ruin people's day with its exile and its escape to surprise you from the graveyard. Libation, another way to get rid of enchantments potentially. Yeah, I didn't end up including this, but I actually like it. Now, I know I've talked a lot about you don't want to give your opponent the option to sack enchantments necessarily, but this is obviously one that you can control very specifically. So yeah, obviously don't do it when you've given them something that they would want to get rid of anyway, but there's going to be plenty of cases in time when that's not the situation, and this is instant. So you just control when you do it, basically. It's one of Black's only ways to get rid of enchantments. So I feel like this might end up back in the deck. Alright, Despotic Scepter. This is a really interesting card. It doesn't fit many places, but it might fit here in Blim. Bury target permanent you own. So that's basically destroy, can't be regenerated. Really nice little guy. I used to have this in here because I would give away stuff and then I'd bury it anyway after it was all over because I didn't want to have it, but it ended up being better just to run stuff that you don't have to bury anyway. This is also really good if people try to exile your creatures and you don't want it to exile, you just want to go to your yard. So this card's not bad. This card's better than it seems, really, and it can do it with anything. So it's got a lot of uses. There is a lot of times where it could be just a dead card and never comes in handy, but every time I played it, it actually came in quite handy. Either if it was burying my stuff in response when they tried to steal it for a turn, or giving something and then burying it, or yeah, most of the stuff like that, or like I said, protecting from exile. So this card is better than it seems. Like at first read, it seems terrible, because like, why would you ever want to do that? But there are cases, and you can do this at instant speed for no mana once it's out. So it's a nice effect to just have at the ready. I don't know, that card might find its way back in at some point. It's also not the worst card to give away with Blim, because sometimes they'll have no use for it, and you'd be like, here, have this. Now you have another permanent and get more triggers. Alright, other cards, Masterwork of Ingenuity. I just really like this card. Mirror Shield, I think this would be great protection for Blim. Death Touch. This shutting off Death Touch on your creature and giving it hexproof. I think this is better than it seems. I'm curious to see if people are going to start playing this Mirror Shield at any point. Yeah, I like it. Mimic Bat, just because it's fun, really. I love Mimic Bat. But I guess while we're talking about Mimic Bat, it does sort of synergize, because you can give them this token with the Blim trigger, and it's going to get sacked at the end of turn anyway, or exiled. So another thing that could do some giveaway shenanigans is that Mimic Bat, just a little expensive. Theater of Horrors, I just like this for the potential extra cards. Not that great, I don't think I'm going to play it. Oath of Lim Duel. Now this is very Blim specific. I had it in here for a while. If you give this enchantment to someone that has no black mana, they're going to lose. Okay, so it says, for each 1 damage dealt to you, or 1 life lost, sack a permanent other than Oath of Lim Duel, and that's it. Ignore this effect if you control no other permanents other than Oath of Lim Duel and have no cards in your hand. Oh, it's or discard. So anytime you take a damage or lose a life, you've got to sack permanent or discard a card other than this card. So at some point, if they have this out, they're going to be left with no cards in hand and no more permanents. If they don't have this double black to draw a bunch of cards, then they're completely, yeah, this card just ruins people. I didn't put it in because it seemed a little hard to actually close out the game with it. It's just not an instant effect, kind of like Immortal Coil can be. But I really want to hear about people's experience with Oath of Lim Duel if they played it in Blim, because I think it's definitely a solid Blim card, and it might find its way back in the deck at some point. And the downside, though, of if you can't give it away, could really ruin your day, though. If someone just like, you play this and someone's like, oh, a lightning bolt you, and then this, and then you're just like, oh man, gotta sack a bunch of stuff, this is no good. So this is the downside. It's pretty risky, but the upside is also really cool, where you can just absolutely massacre a player, which by giving something away. It's the Blim way. It's so fun. Zanduate, of course, just a strong black card. This might be better than Torment of Hailfire in this deck, potentially. So we'll see. Might find its way in place of that at some point. But yeah, that's it. That's what I got. I think I talked about pretty much everything. There might have been a few cards I have considered at points and didn't mention, but leave your comments down below. Is any card popping up in your head that you're thinking would be perfect in Blim that I haven't even talked about or mentioned? Or what is your favorite card? Anything, feel free, leave any comment, I would appreciate it. Thanks for watching my Blim, the Comedic Genius Commander deck tech in this zero budget format. Yes, once I get more subs and monetized and potentially sponsors and all that, which will hopefully come one day, I will ramp up the production value a bit. For now, I kind of just got to do this lifestyle, and hopefully it's chill and cool enough to watch, and you guys will leave likes and sub and stuff. So appreciate you guys, and yeah, leave a comment. I guess I'm trying to think of some good closing stuff to say, but I don't know, just enjoy the comedy. That's one thing I really love about this deck, is the sheer weirdness and hilarious situations. It's not all hilarious. It's hilarious to the person doing it, but to the person on the receiving end of Oath of Lim Duel, it might be a little triggering. So if you have an easily triggered group, this might not be the deck, but it's just so funny. I just love it. If you have a group with good sense of humor, this is going to be a really fun deck for you to play. Alright, thanks again. Don't forget to leave interactions. I would really appreciate it. I'll respond to as many comments as I can, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Matt from MTG Ownage, over and out. Peace.